to the One for the Road podcast. My name is Mr. K. Alongside me, as always, is C Squared. Tonight's topics: great inventions you've never heard of. And we'll begin with Nikola Tesla and free electricity from the atmosphere. Nikola Tesla in 1901 filed a patent called the apparatus for the utilization of radiant energy. In it, he said that if you could build a tower up to 150 feet up into the air with a metal plate, that you could absorb the electricity that is in the air in that height and harness that to make electricity.
And it
So,
seemed to work. They pulled the plug on that. I believe J.P. Morgan was the financer of that. When he
yes,
found out it was going to be free, he pulled the
yes,
plug on the financing. Isn't that
yes.
ironic?
Yeah, the other remarkable thing is that pre-1900 buildings were all built with the same domes and they're all copper and they
Yeah.
contained massive amounts of electricity.
Yeah, and so I've seen the video of what they would consider Tartarian architecture,
Yes,
and it did all kinds of things. And I think it was Penn Station was originally
yes,
built like that, and they changed it around where the temperature was with limited heating, so it was electricity and it was like ventilation ducts, and how all these coils and stuff of that ran through the architecture of these buildings, and the temperature was always like constant in there,
yes,
and they were able to generate their own electricity. And as soon as big business, it seems like the Rockefellers, J.P. Morgan,
yes,
all these other folks got involved in that type of thing. They, in particularly, pushed to suppress and modernize those
yes.
buildings, modernize it, meaning
Modernize.
making it run off a metered electric that goes back to my business and
Yes.
charges you. And
Yes. Yeah. JP Morgan owned all the electric companies. So anything
right,
where you could get electricity from the air was detrimental to JP Morgan's future income
yeah,
stream.
well, and they owned all the oil companies too. Oil companies, coal, lots of mining
Yes.
and drilling companies, and so that is how they essentially pushed to change to suppress considerable amounts of technology that would allow people not to buy anything from them. And
Right, right. Going back a little bit to the domed buildings, I read that there was a domed building that had the copper dome. And in 1912, as part of the standardization, they took the copper out and replaced it with zinc. And everybody said that the first year they did that, they almost froze to death. No matter what the temperature was outside, they almost froze to death, where that was not a problem prior to removing the copper dome and replacing it with zinc.
right, and because copper being a huge electrical conductor,
Right.
and it's like you almost wonder another in a modern aspect if things like graphene, since copper is quite expensive, if you couldn't do the same thing with like graphene technology. And that's like fiberglass. They mold that into like fiberglass. That thing would last 200 years.
Right, right. Yeah, but it was so funny. The guy was like, "Stupid idiots replaced the copper dome. We almost froze to death the first year they put that. We had the zinc." He goes, "That was never a problem prior."
Right, exactly. Yeah, yeah. So you look at all these old architectures, and there are still some buildings that have obviously had the copper stripped out of them. But the bottom line is, if you put that stuff back, those old buildings, as a matter of fact, I was just looking at a theater um, at one place. It was built in 1895, and it still
Hmm.
had the dome on it, and it still had the ion slash gathering or whatever they atmospheric capacitor
Right.
rods on the top of the thing. You're
Hmm.
like, you wonder how much it would be to actually restore a building like that
Right. Right. Right.
to its former glory and
Yeah.
ingenious engineering.
Yeah. I just love the fact that, and it's amazing that those types of buildings required hardly any internal heat or
Right, right,
fuel to heat the building.
right. Yeah, yeah, because I think it was the way they built the air ducts and the way that
Right.
they built the uh, uh, coils related to the electricity. They said that even in some of the stairwells and stuff like that, they would have like copper railings and they were actually conductors.
Right.
So I'm not sure
Right.
if you got a shock when you actually grab
Right.
the railing at your own risk, but
Uh, do you remember one of the buildings they said had this gigantic basement, yet it was empty, but they said it was because of Faraday. Did you remember that part?
Uh, yeah, I don't recall what building it was, but yeah,
Right.
the basements. That was another piece. The basements were like super deep, it's
Yes.
foot deep, and ironically enough, um, uh, it is because I believe they drilled copper rods all the way down into the bedrock, and that was part of the whole electrical circuit that they created with this thing.
Wow.
And that's ironic. I don't want to go down the rabbit hole or get off the topic, but the stuff that they just found in the pyramids over there, which was a similar type of scenario of design where they found all this stuff under the pyramids, and it was a similar type thing where rods were drilled down into water, a huge conductor,
Right, right,
huge electrical conductor, rods drilled down into water, like hundreds of feet below these things. So it's like ironic of not only using the difference in the further you go up from the Earth's surface, you get all this electrical charge, all these presumably ions, electrical ion radiation that that does that, and then you go all the way down to below the surface of the Earth, and essentially you get the uh, what is actually put the magnetic field actually produced by the Earth, by the magnetic core of the
right,
Earth, and
right,
so it's like these two different. If we were talking stocks, it'd be something like a divergence between two different pieces and two
right.
different stocks or two different currencies.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Uh, Another thing we found out, the self-powered locomotives in the 1860s that ran on very little coal. Guy found photos of trains in the 1860s, both in America and in Europe, mostly in England, where the trains didn't have a tender car behind the engine to store the vast amounts of coal that it was going to need to fuel locomotives back in the mid 1800s. But they found a few trains that didn't have tender cars, so they were like, well, how did these trains run? Well, they ran on atmospheric condensers and they'd use 40 to 60% less coal. These devices were, again, seemed to be domes with copper tops, and they're mounted on top of the boiler assembly.
Yep. And so that goes to show that's super interesting because yeah, it's like a bell housing, what they would consider
Right.
a bell housing and stuff like that. And so you look at that aspect and say that's not even high up in the air. That's
Now,
basically just sitting on a moving uh vehicle hand at the
right.
time. So how those worked were ingenious, man.
Yeah, they said they ran when the train would move, the air would go into those condensers and create electricity.
Yeah, so that might be it. You're right. The motion
Yes, that
created
they
the
said they derived all the atmosphere they were going to need from the motion of the train.
isn't that crazy?
Yeah,
And of course they when they found the memo, I forget if it was from JP Morgan or whatever sub company it
it was
was, that
JP.
basically said remove all these things and crush this stuff down. And
Right.
so
Yeah.
ironically enough,
Yep. JP Morgan put an end to this too. He owned all the railroad companies and he owned all the coal mines. So trains running with atmospheric condensers that would use less coal wasn't good for JP Morgan's pocket.
exactly,
So he got
exactly.
the US government to back him into standardizing all the trains to use coal only. And any
It
train that couldn't use 100% coal was ordered to be destroyed immediately.
exactly, exactly. And so you look at that aspect and say suppressed technology and was suppressed by a bunch of people who were trying to get a monopoly
Yes,
on different industries and kind
yes,
of rotten and
right, right. I mean, you wonder if that stuff would still go on today, where if you could get rid of all the electric companies and all the people who work at the electric company and all the linemen, would they fight that? Because that technology would put them out of a job.
you're absolutely they absolutely would fight that.
Right.
I mean, you saw if you move into modern technology, they spent oil companies spent uh, tens of millions, if not $100 million, um, uh, trying to um, determine that the guy the MIT scientist Pons and Fleischmann, who in the 80s, early 80s, basically had experiments that said that nano nuclear stuff
Right.
actually went on, and they spent literally $100 million to get rid of those guys and discredit them. Was the word I
Yes.
was looking for. Discredit them. And the bottom line is, it turns out they were right, and both
Yep.
of them lost their jobs at MIT. They were called frauds. They were
Wow.
ridiculed, all kinds of stuff like that. And guess what? They actually had probably the best invention in the last 50 years was what they
Yes.
discovered. And they were called frauds and both lost their jobs, man.
Yeah. 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 And yeah, the Energy Consortium has done a brilliant job at discrediting anything that threatens uh, their monopoly, really, on energy.
Yep. Yeah.
So,
And if you look, I'll just say one thing. If you go back to like the Eastern Europe Tartarian designs where they were kind of actually started, and Tesla, you look at it, and Tesla actually was involved with a doctor named Rife, who eventually supposedly had a cure for cancer
oh,
using
wow.
sound waves and like pulsing sound waves and stuff of that nature. And he was a buddy of Tesla's. or I had a connection to Tesla. I think he was much younger than Tesla, but the thought of that was is some of the Tartarian technology actually represents that they were doing the same thing in the 1800s with like what would be considered a Tibetan musical bowl generating frequencies and healing people of illnesses with
Hmm.
frequencies. And there was actually within the last 10 years, a TED talk on the exact same thing. So, ironically enough, we keep reinventing the same
Right,
cures that never actually come out. The cure has been around apparently for 170 years to
uh,
cure disease with this type stuff, and it never actually gets anywhere.
right,
And
right.
because it's cheap.
Yeah,
And
yeah. So I wanted to bring up the story of Stanley Meyer from our neck of the woods, Grove City, Ohio, who invented the water fuel cell and the water engine. Wikipedia claims it is non-functional, but he people have seen him drive like 100 miles in a dune buggy on 22 gallons of water. He had a special donut-shaped resonant transformer, and what it would do, it would split the water into equal parts hydrogen and oxygen.
yeah,
And using high voltage, he could power the car that. And he had a patent on it in 1990 for
isn't
this.
that correct? And so that is totally makes sense there, John, in the fact of that technology is well known called hydrolysis, and
Yes.
and so not so much as fuel cell, but I had a little rocket from Radio Shack that I gave to my kids, and it operated off of like a couple of batteries. The battery sent electric through the water and created
Yep.
hydrogen. And then at a certain point, you pushed a button, and the little igniter ignited the hydrogen. That would blow the rocket 30 or 40 feet in the
Yep.
air. And
Yep.
so, but you look at that aspect and say that depending on what he was using um, uh, to generate the electricity to do the hydrolysis, that is very, very possible. I
Right.
don't know if he had a fuel cell or he had a
Yeah, he had a fuel
HV.
cell. He had a
Oh,
fuel
okay,
cell.
that's ingenious at that
Right.
time.
Right.
But
Right.
so you look, so it was basically electric. But the bottom line is you have on all these new cars that are hybrid cars, this regenerative technology where you apply the brakes where your wheels are spinning and that's actually generating electricity. Then you apply the brakes and the braking thing actually generates electrical charge because you're actually slowing down the wheels, so potentially there is the possibility of generating electricity from that. So you look at it and say, if he had all that technology where he was generating this electricity to make the hydrogen, it makes perfect sense.
Right. 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 You'll love this. He died suddenly in 1998 when he was having uh, dinner with two Belgian investors. They were drinking, and then he stumbled outside, and his last words are, "They poisoned me."
Isn't that ironic, dude? It
Heaven knows
I
what the they is in that
right,
sentence.
exactly. And you look at that aspect of things and say, with all the stuff that is going on in files that are being released by government
Right.
agencies and stuff of that nature, highly believable, highly
Right.
believable. And this stuff
Right.
has been going on for hundreds of years. And,
Yeah.
it's like, so what is on the surface? And this is with the title of this show, Suppressed Technology. So why is a bunch of this stuff suppressed? Because either I'm able to buy off the government to actually do things, have a monopoly on the industry. Or if I can't get a monopoly on the industry, I send in a couple of investors and you mysteriously fall over dead
Right.
via poison or a heart attack
Right.
that doesn't truly exist. Speaking of technology, you know,
Yeah.
which is probably really a taser,
Yeah. Right.
high
Right.
voltage taser. And
Right.
so the bottom line is that this stuff has been going on for 100 years, and how much technology has actually been suppressed in energy is huge. Healthcare is another possibility too. And
Right, right. So here's an amazing thing. All the Stanley Meyer stuff happened in the 90s, but 1977, the world famous author David Mamet wrote a play called The Water Engine. Here is what the water engine's about. The inventor of the water engine in 1930s is killed at the end by the lawyers the inventor seek to get a patent, who are really out to steal his invention and make a fortune.
yeah, isn't that
So David
ironic?
Mamet wrote a play in 77 called The Water Engine that closely mirrors Stanley.
Well, so I won't say suppressed technology because everybody has known about DC electricity and that became public. You know, Thomas Edison was in the car business in the 30s, apparently. And, and so I'll just tell you this quick story. So he was having electric cars manufactured in Detroit. He had perfected the electric car, DC based electric car, man. And so every time that one of the they would put the cars on the trains, all the cars would come back sabotaged on the
Oh,
trains. So Mr. Edison got wise to the fact that whoever owned these trains
right.
were sabotaging these things after they came out of the factory in Detroit. So he built his own manufacturing operation in New Jersey. Want to know what happens next? As soon as it opened up, it burned to the ground. His 4 acre facility burned to the ground, and in some arson related type of scenario. And Mr. Edison decided it was wise to exit the car business.
Yes, yes.
Isn't that
And it's
ironic?
amazing they never found the perpetrators that blew up the
Exactly.
building or sabotaged his cars on the train either.
Yeah, ironic, isn't it? And
Right. All right. You can catch us on YouTube. Please subscribe and watch us on YouTube. Our email address is one for the road podcast at gmail.com. We do have a website. It's onefortheroad.net. We are on 4 audio platforms, those being, let's see if I can remember them: Spotify, RSS, Podbean, and Zeno.fm. 4C squared. I'm Mr. K.
thanks
Have a
for
good
tuning in,
week.
folks.